Today's webinar is about getting our frontline people to identify and address waste in their workplace. Presenting the session today is Ross Kennedy. Ross is the President and Founder of CTPM, a team of business improvement coaches servicing clients throughout Australasia. Ross is recognised as Australasia's leading authority on total productive maintenance and CTPM's Australasian lean approach to operational excellence through continuous improvement. So let's get started with today's session, and I'll now pass you over to Ross.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar today. And thank you for joining us. Appreciate you making the time to listen in. The topic for today was given to us by one of our members, so we're very pleased to be able to hopefully address their issue, which is getting our frontline to identify and address waste in their workplace. So we've identified 5 points to talk about: why address waste, types of waste, using cause for pause and time lost to identify waste, how best to address waste in the workplace, and finally, how do we link addressing waste into our daily review process. So I thought I'd start by the first point, which is why address waste. What are we trying to achieve from a customer's perspective? And I thought I'd take a slide from Professor Peter Hines' presentation, who's Director of Lean Enterprise Research Centre, when I attended one of his presentations many years ago. And he said that his interpretation of thinking, the thinking behind lean, or striving for operational excellence, is 5 points. Identify all the steps necessary to design, order and produce the product or service across the whole value stream so as to highlight non-value adding waste. So in other words, the concept of lean is to reduce lead time, and to do that by getting rid of the non-value adding, and he referred to the word waste. Make those actions that create value, I should say, flow without interruptions, detours or waiting. And again, we're talking about interruptions, detours or waiting as a form of waste. Only produce what is pulled by the customer just in time, and that's exactly what you want to do if you're building automobiles, as in Toyota. Some companies we know that may not apply. Our friends at Cooper's Brewery, for example, don't wait for people to order a beer, they have a warehouse full. But that suits their industry, their business. Strive for perfection by continually removing successive layers of waste as they are uncovered, and finally specify what does or does not create value from the customer's perspective. So in other words, when you design a product or service, make sure it's fit for purpose. So you can see the whole thinking behind lean is very much focused on this concept of understanding what non-value adding waste is and how do you eliminate it so you better service your customer and obviously have a more effective processes, which would obviously impact on the bottom line. So there's certainly reasons for understanding waste and getting your frontline, people who are out there doing the work, to start, because they're the ones who can see it around them, to be able to do something about it. So if we think about, and I'll just use this slide on, we call the key components of Australasian TPM and lean, which is, as we go down our journey for operational excellence, or lean, or whatever you want to call it, you need direction, you need to have an improvement vision, you need to have values the way we behave, as in Toyota and their respect for people, a good example, and the principles, the thinking behind it. And see the two in the middle, lead time reduction and flow. Well, it's all about, again, using lead time to reduce waste so you minimize lead time, and automate quality and visual management, so having perfect quality. And next to those two is, one, you need reliable equipment, total productive maintenance, probably the best way of achieving that, and you need engagement and alignment of your people so they can identify problems at the earliest possible time. Obviously, there's a lot of methods. and that's what we'll be talking about today, some of the methods we can use to identify waste and address it. And there's obviously a lot of tools we use, check sheets, etc. And there's all different activities. And the two we'll talk about probably the most today is probably cross-functional teams and area-based teams. Now, wastes. What types of waste? Is the Toyota model relevant for your workplace? So if you go online, you'll see, and you look under the 7 wastes, Google the 7 wastes, and you'll see lots of information, and you'll see lots of, I guess, graphics like this one I've just taken to show there's a lot of this around. And people like to put, little pictures to help people remember or think about what the wastes are, which is an excellent way of doing it. But I think in most cases of all the examples you see, sometimes the language is a little bit different, and the order is sometimes displayed differently. This model uses what they call the Tim Wood framework, which means you start off with something starting with T, then go I-M, Tim, and then W-O-O-D. A simpler way of looking at it than just in the straight down, you've got transport, inventory. Some people use motion or movement. We tend to use the word motion in relation to people and movement in relation to machines and materials. But again, every site may have their own language they wish to use. Waiting over production, over processing and defects. The other interesting thing, you've got Toyota and their 7 wastes, which is what the Toyota production system was based on. When Professor Jeffrey Leica wrote about the Toyota Way in 2004, he added an extra waste called the 8th waste, unused employee creativity. Now, Toyota don't see that as a waste because they don't have it. They realized back in the 60s as they were developing their Toyota production system, Taguchi Ono, the gentleman working for Toyota who created the Toyota production system, realized very early in the piece that they were very scarce on resources at Toyota. They couldn't afford all the process engineers, industrial engineers that the big American car companies had. So they worked on the basis that if they could engage all their people who were actually doing the work, one, they could find the problems at the earliest possible time because they're the ones actually seeing what's going on, and if they could train them up to actually get involved in improvement, they would unleash an incredible potential and give them the opportunity to go and beat the American car companies. So, and again, that's a very fundamental thing of Lean, is about engaging your people. So how do we do that? The key activities are about addressing losses, whether it be about equipment losses or process wastes or waste. We use this model of both ends of the Pareto chart, which is simply saying you've got the big losses or wastes on the left-hand side and the very small, minor little things on the right-hand side. And what we've found the most successful is we attack the Pareto chart losses at both ends. You have your cross-functional teams looking for the technical issues and attacking the big losses, and they're often made up of various facets of issues and departments, and that's why you need cross-functional teams. And then you have your area-based teams of people out there doing the work, the front line, and them finding all the little things. And it's amazing, by getting all the little things fixed up, you have quite a big impact on the big losses. So sort of fundamental to approaching losses and waste is recognizing we need both cross-functional and area-based teams, and so as to address the 8th waste of engaging our people. Now, I thought I'd just mention a little bit, another couple of tools we use to help identify waste and get people thinking about waste, because we often find in the workplace a lot of people are I know, set in their ways, or this is the way it's always happens, and we just accept that waste will always occur. So we start getting people, apart from using lead time reduction, which is probably the most important driver for improving processes, is what we call cause for pause. And we got people thinking about cause for pause. And we do that by asking questions like, do you ever get frustrated because you get interrupted when you're trying to complete a task? When you go back to a task that was interrupted, do you ever find there is a greater risk of making an error as you try to remember where you left off? Now, this cause for pause concept applies both in the factory and the production, but it applies to maintenance and other service areas like lab and also the office environment. So again, we can use cause for pause in the across the whole business. And the other one is time lost. And we use this, originally we got time lost that was used in the maintenance and support area departments, where we would go into a maintenance department and get the maintainers to do a little survey about, did you ever get any time lost during the week because you couldn't find what you wanted when you go to the task, you couldn't get the technical information, or someone told you the wrong information when you went out to the job and you had to come back and get different tools, etc. And we use some prompting questions like, do you ever get frustrated because you can't find something when you're about to do a task? Do you ever get frustrated because things don't go smoothly? Do you ever get frustrated because the inputs you have to work with aren't perfect? And there's a list of questions that you can ask about time lost. What we found is in a typical maintenance department, time lost for the average maintainer is about 35% a week. And when we did this in a legal firm, very large legal firm up in Sydney, we did a similar survey for all their people, and they had about 100 people in their firm. And the figures came in around about the 30% mark as well, 30 to 35, that they were losing because they're waiting for information, the information wasn't right, etc., etc. So it's a great way to get people thinking about and even measuring the extent of waste that's occurring in their workplace. So how best do we address waste in the workplace? Well, I thought I'd just go through these 8 wastes. We've taken some language out of the Toyota Field Book from Leica and Mia. And I thought I'd just use very quick little examples of how you could address that waste. And there's a couple of ways. For first one, transport or conveyance. What we found is over at Goodman Fielder's Dairy over at Longburn in New Zealand, when we were working with them, they had pedestrian and forklift movements. And this little diagram on the right is, you can see the massive amount of when they created the spider diagram, spaghetti diagram, I should say, of the area of all the movements that were occurring. So that we put together a cross-functional team, and the outcome was quite a, they went from 264 movements down to 108 movements. If anyone wants to read about the story, it is in one of our e-news articles. I think it was published in December 2015. So that would be available to our members on our webpage, or you can contact us for it. Another example of addressing transport and conveyance issues was the introduction of work area management, or 5S, using area-based teams to focus on understanding and eliminating waste. So getting people to understand what is waste all about, so as to ensure ownership to solutions. And the diagram I've got there is from Nara Chemicals, a company we worked with last year, and we had teams right across the whole business doing 5S, or work area management, and significant reduction in movement of and conveyance of, especially their moving bottles and containers around that needed to be filling with all their chemicals. So different ways to address waste. The second one is excess inventory. So we have too much inventory everywhere, as we can see here in this example, explanation of excess inventory. So how do we address that? Well, at one site, at our friends at Scott Safety, this was their production planning team. They put together a cross-functional team, and what they were trying to do was introduce a stable production plan for their dominant product, which was the making of their safety helmets through their molding process. And what they did was go and identify the dominant product. They made a great range of helmets, but the dominant ones, which makes up about 6% of their products, which 6% of their SKUs or products, which equated to about 50% of their production. And then they introduced a fixed sequence, fixed time schedule, which really stabilized and eliminated excess inventory everywhere, reduced the inventory out of the factory. Sure, there's a little bit of extra holding buffer stocks, but they were very well controlled. So we took the variation out of production. You had 2 machines out of the 4 that just had a fixed schedule. Everyone knew exactly what was going, and there was no excess inventory associated with the manufacture of those helmets. So again, can be addressed through cross-functional teams. Unnecessary movement. So any motion employees have to perform during the course of their work. Again, we find 5S is or work area management and an area-based teams. Now, you can have industrial engineers go in and look at what's going on and tell people they've got to change the way they do things, or you get the people doing the work to get involved, learning about what is waste, and then looking at ways that they can improve their work area to eliminate the waste. We had one situation I went to some years back at a site where they had introduced work area management or 5S, and they had introduced a number of shadow boards. And on the shadow boards, they were storing all their tools that the operators needed to make the product. Now, what was interesting was that when I was there and observing, the actual shadow board when I arrived was empty because everyone had gone and got the tools and were using it to make their product. And I asked the question, what happens at the end of the shift? They said, oh, they all go back and put the tools back on the shadow board so everyone knows that the tools are all ready for the next day. And the next question was, well, why do they have to walk over the shadow board? Isn't that waste? They're walking over to a shadow board, they're walking back to the job. Why aren't the tools located next to where they work? And then you can see the light bulbs come on. And next time I visit, no more shadow boards, but all the tools are right where the people work. So, yeah, it's getting people to think about unnecessary movement, not just go and look at all the fancy literature about 5S and go and put shadow boards everywhere. Would be a good example. 4, waiting. Waiting for things to happen or things not turning up, etc. Now, what we find is waiting can be addressed again. You can go and put a cross-functional team together or use an industrial engineer, but we prefer a cross-functional team to go and look at, okay, if we've got imbalance in production because we're moving things through, we've got to look at what we call the takt time. In other words, what's the rate that the customer wants the output, and then look at how do we establish that takt time at all the processes so you balance things. And that might mean you have extra labour on one process and less labour on another, slow one down, speed one up, so you get a balance going through the production process. So that's what we call line balancing. And then the other way is you establish an effective daily review meeting process. So as issues of waiting and things not progressing can be identified and picked up in your scoreboard and on your daily review process, so you can address those issues. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end. The next one's 5, overproduction, producing items earlier or in greater quantities. Again, introducing a production planning cross-functional improvement team, introducing stable production plan through flow logic by focusing on your dominant products initially is probably the most effective way to control over production. The other one is over processing or incorrect processing. Producing due to poor tooling or whatever waste is generated, providing higher quality products is necessary. Work is done to fill in time rather than spend waiting, so people overproduce. The obvious one is some companies, and I think most companies have stopped doing this now, and that's paying bonuses for output, so that the more you make, the more money you get, so you end up, well, keep the line going, keep making it, so we get our bonus. I think our friend Dr. Edwards Deming highlighted this point many years ago, that it wasn't real smart to do things like that. And again, it's a production planning and scheduling team approach which can often have a good look at these issues and start addressing them. And the number 7 one is defects, production of defect parts, or repairing, rework, scrap, etc. So in other words, getting perfect quality. Now, what we've found with perfect quality, and a good example of this would be New Zealand Sugar, where we did a lot of work with them some years back, was, and they came along and gave a great presentation at a couple of our forums, is to determine the skills and training required of your frontline people using training within industry principles. So we use what we call a micro-education and training-based skills cross-functional team, where you get your senior operators and your maintenance people, and you look at the equipment and you say, okay, what are the ideal settings for running this equipment? So some people call it center lining the equipment, working out all the settings for all the different products you make and why you have to do things a certain way, and that's where the maintenance people come into it. And it's amazing when you do that process how you realize that sometimes even your senior operators don't really understand the functioning of equipment. Then you can develop, once you understand what is required to really operate the equipment properly to get the best out of it, you can then, using training within industry principles, to develop proper standard operating procedures that not only highlight key steps, but also the reason behind key steps, so people understand why they have to do things a certain way. And then the other key thing to this is the people to train your operators or your frontline people are the frontline leaders, not the training department or the head senior operator or whatever. It's got to be your frontline leaders who do the training, so they take responsibility for it, and they can also monitor it and go back and keep following up on it. And it's amazing, especially things like speed loss on equipment is really addressed this way, where people run equipment a bit slow because they're not too sure about how things are going. So, and also getting people trained up so they understand what is the quality parameters of coming to them, what are the quality parameters that they should be producing to, and what are the quality parameters before they send something to the next process. And just going around and asking your operators, for example, how do you know what's coming to you is correct, is right? How do you know what you're doing is producing the right output and you're following the right process? And how do you know what you're sending down to the next process is exactly what is required? And it's interesting asking those 3 questions of operators, because sometimes you get some pretty scary answers. And we did that at one company where we were having problems with complaints from customers, and we went out and got the team to go and ask those questions of operators, and they came back a bit white-faced because the answers were not what they really wanted to hear. Like, well, it comes to me, so it must be right, and I do it this way because Fred over there is the senior guy and he showed me how to do it, so I just follow what he told me. And how do you know what you're pumping out? Well, no one complains, so it must be okay. Not quite the quality answers you wanted. Last one, unused employee creativity. Well, this is just progressively getting all your people involved in properly structured and facilitated cross-functional team and area-based team improvement activities. And we say progressive. You don't do it all at once. You cascade. You pick some areas and you cascade out. But it's only getting your people regularly involved in improvement teams that they will continually keep developing their skills to identify wastes at the earliest possible time. And the last point we wanted to touch on very briefly before we finish up is just this concept of the purpose of the daily review meeting. How do we link addressing waste into our daily review process? And it's very important to do this because often people don't even talk about, do we have any waste, or get people to think about that. So daily review meetings or daily review process, you want to review the previous day's performance, what can we learn, and what actions do we need to follow up on to stop issues and problems from happening again, critical part. View what will impact today and the next day's performance, so your frontline leaders or your supervisors can have a good day because they're getting proper support to make sure everything is right, and obviously a communication process. So at your meetings, obviously you're measuring performance of the previous day to highlight problems. And the indicators that we find for waste is if your output is dependent on people. I was at a site yesterday where they're making vehicles, specialized vehicles for fire services and ambulance services and whatever. And it's all about assembling, fabricating stuff and assembling it all together. So as was highlighted, the key indicator for them that there's a lot of waste in the place is their productivity measure. How many employee hours does it take to make a truck, for example? And as we were saying, if the hours are long, well, why? And we start getting people to think about it, and they say, well, we walk around looking for the tool, or we didn't have the part there, had to go over the store and get the part, etc. And that's all reflected in the hours going into a job. And we say, well, if we start addressing waste, you'll see that figure improve significantly. And that's another good reason why you want to focus on eliminating waste. If on other hands, like at our client Cooper's Brewery, on their bottling lines, it's all automated. It is highly dependent, output is dependent on the machinery, on the line running. So the key indicator of waste is OEE measure. If your OEE is low, it means you're having losses, you're having problems. And there must be waste for that to occur. So again, different measure, but again, you can use those at your daily review meetings to monitor, and then what do we need to do to stop it from happening again, and getting that mindset into the business. So daily review meetings are absolutely a critical part of this whole thing, apart from having your improvement teams. Hopefully that's sort of giving you a bit of an insight. Waste is not just doing one thing. It's not just going out there and tell everyone to get rid of the waste. They've got to understand it, they've got to see it, and you've got to look at it from different perspectives. And that's where cross-functional area-based teams and daily review meetings are all absolutely critical to really drive the waste out. Like we said at the very start about from Peter Hine, where is identify all the steps necessary to design, order, and produce the product service across the whole value stream so as to highlight non-value-adding waste. And the people who do the work are the best people to get involved and satisfy that 8th waste that our friend Professor Leica identified as unused employee creativity. How do we help? For those in New South Wales, Smart and Skill funding is still available. So if you want any help, we can get funding, and it becomes very, very cost-effective way of engaging your people, getting them recognition with a couple of units of competitive systems and practices qualification, and getting big gains. And we've also got a lot of range of support materials. Members can buy them, support materials, and use them, or you can get us to come along and help you use the support material. Really gives you a lot of structure and discipline into your improvement activities. And with that in mind, if you want to learn more about OEE, we've got my book was published there back in August 2017. And if you want to learn more about daily review management, that book was published last month or in December. So that's now available as well. And with that, thank you very much for attending. Hope you found it of some value. And if you have any questions, please do not hesitate to ask them now, or send them to me at any time, or give me a call or whatever, and we're here to help. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Ross. That was a great presentation. And as Ross said, if you have any questions, please feel free to press the raise your hand button on your control panel, or type in a question, and I can voice your question to Ross right now. Well, I'll give you a few seconds to have a think about that. Just a reminder that a recording of this webinar will be uploaded onto our YouTube channel this afternoon, so please feel free to share it with your colleagues. Ross, I think we've got a question here from Michael. I'll just unmute you, Michael, if you want to voice your question. You there, Michael?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yep, I can hear you, Michael.
No worries. I was just curious as to the cost of the books, and if there's any other books in the series or in the collection, please.
Are the books or the manuals? Like the two books for sale through like Amazon and other providers. I think they're selling in Australia for about $60,
I think, yeah.
$60, about $60, I think. But for if you want to buy either of those two books from Amazon or whatever.
From Amazon, yeah.
Yep, they're all the leading book people have them online now these days. As far as the team member manual, etc., which I referred to in there, we've got all these different daily review process, all these team member manuals. We sell those. They're roughly between about $30 and $40 each.
Okay.
But we can give you. We've got a price list for our members, and we can share that with you. There's quite an extensive range. The other thing is we've developed all those ourselves. So, like the other day, I'm with a client, and they wanted to change the language, so we just changed all the language to suit their site.
Okay.
We can tailor the material to suit your site. So when you put a team together, they're all working off the same script, and they've got a disciplined way of doing it.
No worries.
Okay.
Hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thanks for that,
You're welcome, Michael.
I suppose the last part of that question is it possible to the presentation that we've seen today, does that get emailed out, or is that able to be accessed, or how does that work?
We're actually recording the presentation, so it'll be uploaded onto our YouTube channel this afternoon, and you guys will also get a follow-up email with the link to the recording. So you'll get that this afternoon, so you can watch it over again.
Yeah, one of the things we do offer, Michael, is to our members, we if they want a copy of the presentation, we give them send them a PDF version, and then if they want a particular slide to cut into something, I send them a PowerPoint version of specific slides if they wish to use them in a presentation with other material. But that's one of the things we do with our members.
Okay, fantastic.
If you want to become a member, that'd be great.
No worries.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thanks for answering my question.
No worries, thank you. Okay, it doesn't seem like there's any other questions, so we'll go ahead and wrap up this session. And if you have any further questions today, just feel free to contact us at any time. And on behalf of everyone at CTPM, thank you for attending, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.